Sunday School teacher, I'm glad that you've joined us for a time of study and preparation. Let me go ahead and give you a warning here. This lesson that we're going to look at today is going to be one that if you're not careful, you're going to get about halfway through, and that's as far as you're going to get. So you're going to need to really pace yourself because there's a ton of topics in here that you can cover. So we're looking at the lesson for Sunday, November 18th. The title of the lesson is With Submission. James chapter 4, verses 16 through 17. It's not a lot of verses, but there's a ton of content that is there, and there will also be more opportunity for discussion among your group. So just be mindful of that. The point that we want to get across, and this is critical because if we don't get the point, then we're going to get sidetracked. We're going to be chasing rabbits. The point is that believers are to be committed to living out God's will. So we want to focus on that. Here we've got James giving two directives to remove conflicts from among believers. He tells us in chapter 4, verse 7 to submit to God. In chapter 4, verse 15, he says, you should say, if the Lord will. So he's given two directives on handling conflict among believers. We are to remember that God is God, and I am not. God is perfect, I am not. And we are to desire to know and to do God's will in our lives more than anything else, more than winning, more than being right. Our goal should be to know and to do God's will. Whatever His will is, that's what's best for us, and we must accept that fact before we even know His will. We must prayerfully seek God's guidance, and when we are not certain, we should still move forward in what we sense to be His plan. Don't just sit still. And then also, as we struggle and even fail, we can count on God's patience and His understanding of our humanity. So when we mess up, He's going to understand that. If we are seeking to do His will, He's going to be understanding of our failures. Jesus accepted God's will rather than insisting on His own. Mark 14:36. And then God intensely desires that His people remain faithful to Him. So let's think about this idea of submission in these verses. Look, first of all, chapter 4, verse 6 is where we'll start. He says, but He gives greater grace, and therefore He says, God resists the proud, and He gives grace to the humble. Therefore submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and He will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Be miserable and mourn and weep, and let your laughter turn to mourning and joy to gloom. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and He will exalt you. So how do we live a submissive life to the Lord? Well, first of all, through humility. In verse 6, James is saying, for believers who are open to receiving it, God gives strength to remain steadfast in their commitment to Him. He says to resist, and that word resist is actually a military formation or a military stance. It is positioning yourself to be steady. And so it's setting yourself up to be stern. So resist. He says in verse 6, he says that God gives grace. Therefore God resists the proud. The proud, who is he talking about? The arrogant, those who consider them